Farmer challenges mechanic's daughter to fix an impossible engine. What she reveals shocks everyone. Tires grinding over gravel shattered the sleepy quiet of the Texas morning like an alarm bell. Harper Lane, 13 and already more familiar with carburetors than classmates, paused just long enough to glance at the rising plume of dust outside. Her father's garage. The socket wrench in her hand felt heavier as she tightened her grip, the metal warm from hours of sunlit work. The summer heat shimmered through the air, thick with the smell of gasoline, rubber, and motor oil. She didn't speak, didn't move, just listened. Harper had learned long ago that understanding a machine required silence, not words. Then came the voice, sharp, unmistakable, and as arrogant as a hornet. Clayton Briggs had arrived. "You serious, Joe? You got kids fixing my machinery now?" His boots scraped the concrete as he stepped inside, dressed in a stiff monogrammed shirt that screamed money and control. Harper shrank slightly behind the lifted hood of the old Massey Ferguson, careful not to meet his eyes. She'd heard of Clayton. Everyone had. Rich. Ruthless. Known more for lawsuits than livestock. Her father, Joe Lane, set down his wrench. With a calm Harper envied and said quietly, "She's the best shot you've got, Clayton." "She?" Clayton barked out a laugh, half disgust, half entertainment. "You telling me that your daughter, what is she, 12, 13, is going to fix what 4 of my engineers couldn't?" Harper stepped into the light slowly, wiping her hands on a threadbare rag. Her boots were too big, her braid loose under a cap stained with machine grease. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked straight to the tractor, pressed her palm to the side of the engine, and closed her eyes. To her, the machine was a language. It spoke in heat, friction, and the way vibrations hummed through steel. The moment Harper touched the machine, the garage seemed to fall into a hush. Joe stood back, arms crossed, but watching her with an expression that mixed pride with restraint. Harper's fingers ran over the ignition circuit, following wires like trails in the woods. Her breathing steadied. Her other hand found the fuel, assembly, her favorite component, full of hidden rhythms. Milo sat nearby, cross-legged on the floor, wrapping copper wire around his fingers. Her little brother didn't speak, hadn't for as long as she could remember, but his eyes never missed a thing. Especially not today. Harper leaned into the casing, her face inches from the console. "This isn't just a short," she said eventually, voice soft but resolute. "Someone reversed the polarity on the input, and here," she pointed, careful not to touch the scorched panel. "The fuel relay's been capped with a dummy fuse." She paused, straightening. It wasn't a manufacturing flaw. This was deliberate. Silence rippled across the garage like a dropped wrench. Clayton's jaw worked, trying to form a retort, but his engineers shuffled their feet, suddenly unsure. Harper turned to Milo, who had moved closer and was pointing near the axle. There, etched faintly into the metal where no casual glance would linger, were scratch marks. Intentional, regular. Almost like Morse code, except they curved with the natural grain of the casing. Harper knelt beside Milo, brushing away dirt with her sleeve. "Good catch," she murmured, more to him than anyone else. "This is a message." The pattern resolved slowly, not a code, but initials. She traced them out loud. GM. Her brain raced. Could it be Grant Mercer? A name she'd overheard once years ago during a conversation between 2 engineers who thought she wasn't listening. Clayton's posture stiffened. "Are you saying my tractor, my brand new top-of-the-line GPS-integrated tractor, yours was sabotaged?" Harper didn't flinch. "Yes," she said simply, "and not by accident." Her voice was calm, factual, not defiant, just true. Joe raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Milo was still kneeling, tapping his fingers 3 times against the casing, in a rhythm that made Harper think of how he always signaled something important. Harper looked down again and noticed it, a fine powder on the inside seal. Graphite dust, commonly used in electrical manipulation. Someone knew what they were doing. Clayton turned red, not with rage, but embarrassment. His authority had been questioned by a girl in overalls and by a child who hadn't spoken a word. "We'll see about this," he muttered, storming toward his truck. But Harper knew the moment had changed something. For the first time, someone saw her, really saw her. And it wasn't just about what she looked like or how old she was. It was about what she knew. As the truck roared away, Joe turned to her with a small nod. Milo handed her the copper wire, a symbol. They'd begun. News travels fast in small towns, faster than oil leaks or tornadoes. By sunset, half the county had heard about Harper Lane, the kid who cracked Briggs' beast. The other half had already decided she was some sort of prodigy. Journalists showed up in outdated vans with cameras and microphones, sniffing for a story they could sell. One even asked her if she was a mechanical savant, which made her uncomfortable. She wasn't magic. She wasn't a genius. She just listened. Machines had their own music. Most people never bothered to hear it, but Harper always had. At home that night, Harper scrubbed grease from under her nails while Milo sat beside her, building a perfectly balanced spiral out of washers and bolts. He worked silently, methodically, every piece in its place. Harper paused mid-scrub, watching. There was a symmetry in what he made. 3 coils, 1 missing segment, then 2 short loops. "That looks familiar," she murmured, wiping her hands on a towel. She fetched her notebook and flipped to the schematic she'd drawn of the sabotaged engine. The pattern in the wire damage matched Milo's spiral. Her chest tightened. He was showing her something. The following morning, Harper returned to the garage alone, heart pounding with curiosity and unease. She rummaged through the files Joe kept in a dented gray cabinet and pulled the repair logs from the past 6 months. 5 tractors, all with unexplained failures, all within Briggs' network, each showing signs that now, with hindsight, screamed sabotage. Harper cross-referenced the component numbers and noticed one recurring detail: a chip used only in the newest series, a model not yet released to the general public. Someone had access to tech that shouldn't exist outside the factory. Or, worse, someone inside. "Dad," she said later that evening, handing him the papers, "I think this goes deeper than just one faulty tractor." Joe studied the documents in silence. His expression didn't change, but she noticed the way his thumb rubbed a spot on the corner, a sign he was thinking hard. "You might be right," he said finally. "But this kind of thing, it's dangerous, Harp. People don't like being exposed, especially powerful ones." Harper nodded. She wasn't trying to stir trouble, but facts were facts. And she wasn't about to ignore a problem just because it made people uncomfortable. 2 days later, they found the note, slid under the garage door. No envelope, no signature. Just 2 words written in bold, uneven strokes. "Stay quiet." Joe read it twice, then burned it in an old coffee can outside. Harper felt her skin prickle. It wasn't just a warning. It was a confirmation. Someone knew she was getting close. That evening, she double-checked every lock and covered the office window with black tarp. Milo paced near the workbench, unsettled. He wouldn't touch his washers, wouldn't sit. That scared her more than anything. Her brother only changed routine when danger came close. Still, Harper pressed forward. She reviewed blueprints, made copies by hand, and hid them in the false bottom of an oil drum. She cataloged everything: chip serial numbers, failure logs, repair orders. She even mapped out who had worked on which machines and when. Each night, she and Milo sat together, decoding patterns, her with pencil and paper, him with spare parts and placement. One evening, he pulled her hand toward a specific circuit sketch and tapped it twice. She looked closer. A rerouted ground wire in every case, a silent alarm. Milo had spotted the one thing no engineer had. "You're amazing," she whispered, to him. He didn't respond, but the corners of his mouth twitched. A smile, maybe, or the start of one. Joe found them hours later, still working. "You planning to sleep tonight?" he teased. Harper stretched her arms and yawned. "Eventually, Joe paused in the doorway. "Proud of you," he said. "Both of you." Harper's chest warmed, but she said nothing. Compliments made her feel strange, like a wrench used on the wrong bolt. But she appreciated it, quietly, just like Milo. They were alike that way. Listeners, builders, observers, exactly what this mystery needed. The next morning, the sheriff stopped by, claimed he was just checking in, but Harper could tell, from the way he avoided her eyes, that he knew more than he let on. She offered him a cup of coffee, which he refused, then watched as he circled the garage once, eyes landing briefly on the grease-covered schematics near her desk. "Be careful what you dig up, Harper," he said as he left. Joe watched him go, face unreadable. Harper turned to Milo. "They're watching now." He handed her a socket wrench, her favorite one. A sign. Time to be brave. For the next several nights, Harper hardly slept. Her notebook filled with hand-drawn diagrams, part numbers, and names she barely remembered learning. Engineers, distributors, even drivers who had hauled replacement equipment across the county. Each page layered like a puzzle, one thread overlapping another. Milo stayed nearby, never asking questions, but always alert. He'd begun building new shapes, symmetrical towers of spark plugs and washers that Harper started interpreting as signals. Together, they worked in silence, the kind of silence that buzzed with intention. Harper had a sense, a gut feeling she trusted more than most experts trusted machines. She dug deeper into the name she'd seen scratched on the tractor casing, Grant Mercer, a former technician at a supply warehouse in Amarillo, fired 2 months ago after what official reports called a breach of conduct. Unofficially, Harper found whispers online and technician forums of missing parts, data leaks, and unusual prototype access. Mercer had connections and motives. Harper compiled what she could, but the evidence was flimsy. A theory wasn't enough. She needed proof. Something undeniable. And maybe, just maybe, Milo had already found it. He tapped her notebook one night, pointing to a drawn triangle. She realized it wasn't just a symbol. It was the shape stamped into the casing of an engine part Briggs had brought in weeks ago. A faint triangle inside a gear, like a manufacturer's mark, but different. Harper remembered Milo staring at it for minutes, silent. Now she wondered, was it Mercer's signature? A calling card? She pulled the actual part from the inventory bin and inspected it again. The engraving was too shallow to be company issued. She placed it under a microscope lens Joe had in storage. Inside the triangle, hidden beneath the dust, were 2 tiny letters, GM. The next day, Harper took photos, printed them, and filed them into a folder she labeled Confirmed Anomalies. She was building a case. Every tampered part traced back to the same obscure vendor in Amarillo. She made copies of everything and hid the originals in the hollow of an old oil drum Milo had repurposed into a storage box. Joe had seen them working but kept his distance. He knew Harper needed to figure this out on her own. That afternoon, Milo rolled an old toolbox to her side. Inside, tucked under a tangle of cables, was something she'd forgotten. A flash drive. It was from one of Briggs' engineers, left behind after a repair weeks ago. Harper had kept it out of habit, assuming it was junk. But now she booted up an old laptop, isolated from the network, and clicked through the folders. Most files were standard diagnostics. But then she saw it, hidden in an oddly named folder, DL Notes. She opened it and froze. There were logs of breakdowns dating back months, all showing eerily similar patterns. Chips fried just outside warranty, relays jammed with graphite, errors triggered in sequence. Worse, 3 entries ended with the initials GM. Her hands trembled as she printed the logs and added them to her evidence folder. There was no doubt now. Mercer wasn't just tampering. He was orchestrating a full-blown campaign. Sabotage for profit, perhaps revenge. Either way, Harper knew this. Wasn't something to handle quietly anymore. She told Joe everything. He listened, then made a call to the sheriff. But Harper wasn't convinced that law enforcement would act fast or wisely, so she planned ahead. "We need bait," she whispered to Milo. He nodded once, then walked straight to the toolbox and pulled out a busted ignition module. Harper and Milo rigged the module with a GPS tracker, tiny and silent. They connected it to a portable battery and stuffed it into a brand new crate labeled Urgent Delivery. Joe arranged for the crate to be picked up by a distributor known to service Briggs's competitors. If Mercer had eyes in the network, he'd intercept it. It worked. Within 12 hours, the tracker pinged, rerouted from Amarillo, not to Briggs, but to a small property on the outskirts of town registered under a fake name. Harper stared at the map, heart racing. "He's here," she whispered. "He never left." That night, as they reviewed the map by the dim glow of the garage lamp, someone rattled the front door. Not knocking, testing the lock. Joe grabbed a wrench. Harper cut the lights. Milo crawled under the bench, eyes fixed on the shadow that moved across the window. Then, silence. A slip of paper was shoved under the door. Harper waited until the shadow vanished before retrieving it. No threats this time, just coordinates and a date. Tomorrow, midnight. Her fingers tightened around the note. Milo's hand rested on her arm. This wasn't over. But maybe, just maybe, it was close. Midnight came cloaked in heavy clouds and the hum of restless insects. Harper sat in the back seat of Joe's truck, Milo beside her, knees drawn to his chest, headphones over his ears. They'd parked, half a mile from the coordinates, an abandoned grain silo on the edge of town, long sealed off since a fire a decade ago. Joe had insisted on coming. "I won't let my kids walk into something like this alone," he said. Harper didn't argue. She had a flashlight, her folder of evidence, and Milo's newest wire sculpture tucked into her jacket pocket. For luck. They approached the silo carefully, boots crunching on the dry brush. The structure loomed like a forgotten monument, ribs of rusted metal peeling from its walls. A single light flickered near the side entrance. Harper checked her watch. 12:07 a.m. She was late, on purpose. Let them wait. She crouched beside the door and pressed her ear against it. Muffled voices, at least two people. One was calm, clipped, the kind of voice that knew power. The other sounded nervous. She recognized it. One of Briggs's engineers. So that's how Mercer kept up with repairs. Inside, help. Harper motioned to Joe. He handed her the sheriff's old camcorder, already recording. She pressed the red button, then peeked through a crack in the siding. Inside, Mercer paced. Tall, wiry, hair slicked back with oil and ego. "I told you not to escalate," he snapped at the other man. "This girl's poking around too much. We shut it down, understood?" The engineer stammered a reply. Harper's blood pulsed like a timing belt under strain. She had him, a confession, caught on tape. She pulled back, breath shallow. Milo, without a word, pointed to a side ladder leading up the silo. They climbed, carefully, quietly. From the catwalk above, Harper could see the whole layout. Mercer, the engineer, a crate of illegal parts, and a whiteboard listing fields and farm names, most crossed out. One remained. Briggs, the final job. Harper felt a chill. They were planning a catastrophic failure. Milo tugged her sleeve, then handed her the wire spiral he'd made earlier. She didn't understand until she held it against the whiteboard's grid. The spiral matched the sabotage pattern. Fields failed in sequence, like dominoes. Milo had seen it first. He always did. She just hadn't looked closely enough. Harper hit save on the camcorder and whispered to Joe, "We have to go, now." They climbed down the opposite side and sprinted toward the truck, but halfway there, a beam of light cut through the darkness. Mercer's voice echoed, "You shouldn't have come." Harper froze. Milo didn't. He moved first, fast, grabbing Harper's hand and pulling her toward the ditch beside the road. Joe threw open the driver's side door and started the engine. Tires spun, gravel flew, they piled in, hearts thundering. As they sped away, bullets punched the air behind them, splintering the taillight. Back at the garage, Harper paced while Joe called the sheriff again. This time, the tone was different. Joe didn't ask, he demanded. Within 20 minutes, patrol cars pulled in. Harper handed them the camcorder, the photos, the logs. "It's all there," she said, voice hoarse. "Mercer's behind it. He's targeting Briggs, but he's already hurt dozens of farms." The sheriff, older and slower than the job demanded, nodded gravely. "You did good, Harper. Too good. Let's finish this before someone else gets hurt." Harper didn't care for praise. She only cared that it was finally going to end. Thud. Raid happened at dawn. Harper and Milo watched from the back of Joe's truck, parked on a nearby hill. Through binoculars, they saw police enter the silo, flashlights slicing through the early fog. It was over fast. Mercer didn't resist. Not really. Just stood there, arms crossed, as if daring them to try and explain how a teenage girl unraveled his operation. Harper didn't flinch when he looked up toward the hill and met her eyes through the lens. She just stared back, unblinking. He didn't know her, didn't understand her. That's why he lost. That afternoon, Harper returned to the garage. The quiet settled over her shoulders like a weighted blanket, heavy, comforting, familiar. Milo was already rebuilding the carburetor. They'd set aside 2 weeks earlier. No words were needed. Joe walked in with milkshakes, set them down, then leaned against the counter. "So," he said, nodding toward the growing pile of newspaper clippings. "You gonna be famous now?" Harper snorted. "I just want to fix the truck." Joe smiled. Milo handed her a bolt she hadn't asked for, exactly the one she needed. Harper grinned. Things at last were turning back into home. The news broke before noon. Every local station ran the same headline in bold letters. Teen mechanic exposes sabotage ring targeting local farmers. Harper's name was everywhere, online, in print, whispered between neighbors in line at the feed store. People who had never looked her in the eye now stared at her with a mix of awe and confusion. Joe shielded her from most of it. Reporters called, sponsors emailed, and 2 different universities reached out with early acceptance offers. Harper ignored them all. She didn't need scholarships. She needed quiet, solitude, an engine on a bench and Milo nearby. Harper had never liked attention. Praise was strange, noisy, unpredictable, like a loose belt squealing under pressure. She found herself avoiding eye contact even more, spending long hours in the garage just reassembling tools and checking for parts she didn't actually need. People called her brilliant, a prodigy, a hero. But she didn't feel like any of those things. She felt like Harper Lane, the girl who knew machines better than she knew most people, the girl who had spent years learning how to translate the world through noise and movement instead of words. That hadn't changed. Milo adjusted faster than she expected. The garage became busy again, with neighbors and farmers bringing in old tractors, new generators, even sewing machines. Word had spread that Harper was the one who sees what others miss. She didn't correct them. Milo stayed by her side through it all, never speaking, never needing to. He drew diagrams in grease, arranged parts in silent codes only Harper understood. They worked as a team. Joe called them the Quiet Storm. Harper liked that. Milo started arriving early, setting tools in order before she even opened the shop's front doors. His routine had returned. One afternoon, June Carrington arrived, with a worn manual under her arm. "This belonged to my grandfather," she said, offering it with care. "He helped design the first-gen Briggs harvesters. You should have it." Harper flipped through the pages, fingers brushing faded annotations. These weren't just mechanical notes. They were ideas, questions, hopes. She ran her fingers across a sketch of a modified fuel injection system and smiled. "I think I can build this," she said. June smiled back. "I know." It was the kind of interaction Harper usually dreaded, but with June, the silence felt easy, familiar. That evening, Harper and Milo started on the prototype. It was clunky, loud at first, but something about it felt right. The injector responded not just to timing, but to touch, temperature, feedback from the operator's pressure. It was like giving the machine a way to listen. Milo tested it by running gloved fingers along the side, adjusting the flow with minor gestures. The system responded perfectly. Harper felt her chest tighten with pride. This wasn't just repair. It was creation. Not for money or recognition, but because it was possible. Because someone needed it. Because it made sense. When it was done, they gifted the prototype to a local farmer whose hands shook too much to use manual controls anymore. No fanfare, no cameras, just a smile, a tear, and a quiet, "Thank you." Harper stood awkwardly through the gratitude, hands stuffed in her pockets. Milo hid behind the barn door, but when they got back in the truck, Joe looked at them in the toy rearview mirror and said, "You changed that man's life today." Harper didn't answer. She looked at Milo, who offered her one of his washer spirals, a perfect one. That was answer enough. By now, Harper could have left. Big tech schools offered full rides. A university in California even offered to build her a lab designed around her sensory preferences. She read the email 3 times before deleting it. "It's not that I'm afraid," she told Joe one night, staring at the stars through the garage window. "It's just, I already have everything I need here." Joe nodded, didn't push. "The world's loud," he said. "You've made a quiet place that works for you. That's rare. Hold on to it." She squeezed the rag in her hand until oil seeped through her fingers. She would. The fame slowly faded, as all stories do. The reporters moved on, the sponsors lost interest, and the town returned to its rhythms. But the garage was never the same. It became a kind of sanctuary, not just for machines, but for people who didn't quite fit the mold. Milo took to welcoming customers with small gestures, offering them the correct wrench, pointing to the waiting bench with a calm hand. No words, just presence. Harper ran diagnostics with care, explained results with visual charts. People understood. She never changed who she was. The town simply learned how to listen. One morning, a woman arrived at the shop holding her son's hand. He was about 6, quiet, alert, and fascinated by the sound of the air compressor. Harper saw the way his fingers flinched at loud noises, how he flapped slightly when the engine hummed just right. She recognized herself in that movement. She crouched down and offered him a socket driver. "Want to help?" she asked gently. The boy didn't speak, but his smile spread like sunlight through clouds. His mother blinked fast, holding back tears. Harper said nothing more. She didn't need to. The moment spoke on its own. Joe watched from the back room, smiling like he had on the day Harper rebuilt her first starter motor. "You're building something bigger than engines, you know," he said later. Harper shrugged. "I'm just fixing what's broken." But she knew what he meant. The garage had become more than a workplace. It was a place where being different wasn't strange. It was respected. Milo had his corner, neat, organized, full of his quiet signals. Kids came sometimes to just watch him sort bolts by size and shine. Parents whispered, "He reminds me of my daughter," or "My son's like that too." One evening, Harper found a framed clipping pinned to her bedroom wall. It was the first article written about her, back when they called her a prodigy. Someone, probably Joe, had circled one sentence in red ink. "Harper Lane sees what others don't." She stared at it for a long time. Maybe it was true. But she didn't see it as genius. She saw it as something deeper. A way of noticing that came from silence, repetition, and trust. The world had tried to tell her that she needed fixing, but all along it had been the world that needed adjusting. Days turned into months. The prototype injector became a side project, refined and tested, passed along to a few families who needed. Alicia Harper never filed a patent. She didn't want the attention. She just sent out instructions, handwritten, simple, easy to follow. Milo helped translate them into diagrams anyone could use. Together, they built a small kind of change. Not loud, not sweeping, but real. And for the people it reached, it was everything. Harper liked that. She liked the way Milo smiled when someone sent back photos of the injector working in a new field. It mattered. Spring arrived with the scent of wildflowers and grease. Harper spent most mornings with her hands deep in engines, Milo cataloging parts and Joe organizing invoices. The garage buzzed with soft life, a new rhythm, a quieter kind of music. On one wall, a shelf held thank you notes from farmers, photos from families. In the center, framed between two greasy gloves, was Milo's first spiral, the one that had started it all. Visitors often asked what it meant. Harper would just smile and say, "That's how we found the truth." It wasn't a machine. It was a map, a guide. A year after the sabotage plot was dismantled, Clayton Briggs returned to the garage. He didn't wear his usual arrogance, just jeans, a plain shirt, and a toolbox in hand. "Got a combine that won't shift out of..." "Neutral," he said, almost sheepish. Harper nodded and gestured toward the bay. No hard feelings, just work. As he turned to leave, he paused. "Your brother, he's sharp. I didn't get that before." Harper gave him a long look. "He always was. You just didn't know how to see it." Briggs nodded once, then walked away. No apology, but maybe something close. That night, Harper and Milo sat under the stars on the shop roof, watching headlights blink along the distant highway. The world was still out there, loud, fast, unpredictable. But here, on this rooftop above a garage full of life, things felt settled. Milo pointed up. One star flickered faster than the others. "Satellite," Harper said, still watching. He offered her a wrench he'd polished to a shine. She took it, turning it over in her hand. "I guess we're still watching too." Beside her, Milo hummed a soft note, a sound like comfort. They didn't need more than that. People would remember Harper Lane as the girl who took down a sabotage ring, who built machines no one else could imagine, who changed how people saw mechanics and difference. But for her, the story had never been about glory. It had been about her father, her brother, and the little space they made with grease, tools, and understanding. In that garage, engines whispered, minds connected, and silence wasn't absence. It was language. And in that, quiet, Harper found exactly what she'd always needed. Not escape, not fame, but home.